Today is the deadline for government agencies to submit their plans for mass layoffs. The move will paint a clear picture of the impacts of Trump's plans for shrinking the federal government. And breaking today, a federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to reinstate tens of thousands of probationary federal workers who were fired across multiple agencies. Joining me now is the Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels. Brett, the federal judge's ruling is a major win for government workers. Is this the final say, and now federal workers are going to go back on their jobs, or will there be more court challenges?
Yeah, Drew, I think it's definitely fair to assume there will be an appeal of this decision. So certainly not the end of the road, but as you noted, certainly a big win for workers. This affects tens of thousands of government employees across a number of government agencies, but it may be short-lived. It's possible that this will be appealed and put on, reversed by another judge. So more to come in this saga.
And when it comes to the reduction in force plan, do we know which agencies will face the biggest impact? And when will the public get an idea of what the administration's plans actually are?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's fair to expect that some agencies will be more greatly impacted than others. We've already seen, for example, the Department of Education, a huge chunk of that workforce being laid off. So, those agencies like the Department of Education, Department of Veterans Affairs has been pretty heavily targeted. I think we could expect to see big numbers from those. But, certainly I think in the coming days and weeks, we'll get a clearer picture of just how big of a scope these proposed reductions in force are across the government.
Today, the G7 is convening in Canada. This meeting of top diplomats is happening 2 months after President Trump took office, and it's safe to say many of his policies haven't been received well across the world. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going to be there. What's he stepping into?
Yeah, it's quite the potentially awkward situation for Marco Rubio, who is going to have to face these leaders who Trump has, on the one hand upset, and on the other hand maybe united and bolstered some of their support on the home front by attacking some of these allies. Certainly, the meeting being in Canada. At a time when Trump is just repeatedly saying that the U.S. wants to annex Canada, that they're going to tariff Canada, that Canada doesn't have anything that the U.S. actually needs, really creates an awkward diplomatic situation for Rubio. So, this is just the reality that the Secretary of State steps into, working for a president who clearly doesn't mind ribbing and roiling up allies.
Yeah, I want to talk more about all that's been said by the Trump administration about Canada, causing some major concerns inside the country. There's been boycotts that we've seen happening. Secretary of State Rubio was actually asked about the president's comments. Let's take a listen to that.
What he said is it should become the 51st state from an economic standpoint. He says if they became the 51st state, we wouldn't have to worry about the border and fentanyl coming across because now we would be able to manage that. He's made an argument that it's their interest to do so. Obviously, the Canadians don't agree, apparently, but that's not what we're going to discuss at the G7. We defend North America through NORAD and the airspace of our continent together, so not to mention the issues of Ukraine and other commonalities. So we're going to be focused in the G7 on all of those things. That's what the meeting is about. It is not a meeting about how we're going to take over Canada.
Not sure Canada takes it as lightly as Rubio does there, but Canada's foreign minister is actually there to deliver a message, and that is if the U.S. can do that to us, then nobody in the alliance is safe. How are other world leaders reacting to that message?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we saw in Canada with Trump's attacks at Justin Trudeau before he stepped down as prime minister, actually saw his popularity increase. Other world leaders, in the G7 and allies are sort of dealing with a similar situation where they are maybe getting a boost at home because they are taking a stronger stand against the United States. But certainly I think they're sort of grappling with what does this look like if the United States is no longer really a reliable partner. And as Secretary Rubio's comments suggested, these meetings can be very uncomfortable because you have Trump's comments about annexation and bullying these allies really dominating the conversation, even though that's not exactly what these folks are there to discuss.
And Ukraine will be a major topic of discussion during the G7. Special envoy Steve Witkoff is actually in Moscow for talks with Russian officials. And today, Vladimir Putin said the country is in favor of a proposed ceasefire in Ukraine, but that serious issues need to be resolved. Serious issues like, I don't know, how to stop Russia from continuing to attack its neighbors?
Yeah, I think you can take Putin's comments as a sign that he is maybe willing to engage with sort of these discussions at a loose level, but he's not really interested in stopping, Russian forces from invading Ukraine, from attacking Ukraine. I think Putin is looking to solidify their own military gains. Obviously, this comes at a time when Russia is making gains in Ukraine. So certainly, I think there's a lot of skepticism about just how interested Vladimir Putin is in agreeing to any kind of ceasefire.
Also today, the head of NATO, Secretary Mark Rutte, spoke with President Trump. It comes as the Trump administration has cast major doubts on its commitment to the alliance. Do we know anything about that conversation?
Yeah, certainly, what we heard in sort of the early minutes of that conversation are the Secretary General of NATO certainly praising President Trump, as we have heard NATO Secretary General in the past during his first term do. They praised Trump certainly for urging other countries to increase their defense spending. So we're seeing this sort of typical flattery that world leaders try with President Trump. But certainly, as you said, Trump has at times raised skepticism about protecting other NATO allies. So I think it puts the NATO Secretary General in this sort of uncomfortable position, even though they're projecting unity at the outset of this meeting.
Today, in a last-second move, the White House pulled its nomination of David Weldon for director of the CDC. Is this a sign that he didn't have support in the Senate? He was popular among allies of RFK Jr. due to his skepticism of vaccines. Seems like he might fit right in.
Yeah, it's interesting that you make that point, Drew, because on the one hand, there's the question of, well, if senators voted for RFK Jr. despite his vaccine rhetoric, why not vote for Dave Weldon to run the CDC? But from what I've heard from sources is that this nomination was withdrawn. Weldon was informed on Wednesday night that he was being pulled because he didn't have the support in the Senate. The White House got indications from senators that if he made it to a full floor vote, he wasn't going to be confirmed. So I think a sign that senators took issue certainly with some of his rhetoric around vaccines and some of the meetings they had, and that maybe they weren't as fearful of political blowback as they were when RFK Jr. was up for a vote.
All right, that's all I got for you, Brett Samuels. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
And today, emerging news on a story we've been following very closely. Democratic attorneys general in D.C. and 20 other states are suing the Trump administration over its efforts to lay off almost half the workforce at the Department of Education. Earlier this week, 1,300 Education Department staffers were told they are being let go. Here to break down what this means and much more, courts and legal reporter Zach Schonfeld. He's the author of The Hill's latest newsletter, The Gavel. Zach, thanks so much for being here. The Department of Education had just over 4,000 employees when President Trump started his term. The numbers are dwindling now after hundreds have been placed on leave or took a buyout. Now a little under half are being laid off. How could we see this playing out in the courts?
Hey, Drew, the plaintiffs in this case, which, as you mentioned, is a group of Democratic state attorneys general, they are connecting this recent round of layoffs to what Trump has plainly stated, that he wants to effectively dismantle the Department of Education and return the issue of education to the states. So now these attorneys general are trying to go to court to try to stop the administration from carrying out these mass layoffs, which, as you mentioned, is about 1,300 employees who this week were notified that they will be let go. The states raised concerns that the education department after these layoffs is not going to be able to carry out the programs that Congress has mandated and funded already. So they say this is a separation of powers issue where Congress has already appropriated funds for certain programs, and now the education department is seeking to stop a lot of its offices and operations and isn't going to be carrying out its functions that it is obligated to do so under federal law. So that's why they've asked a judge here to step in. Obviously, this case was just filed, so we haven't heard yet from the judge on how the judge is leaning here in this case. But this is now really just the latest lawsuit piling on to the Trump administration's efforts to rapidly reshape the federal bureaucracy. So we've got this new one on the education department, but there's plenty of other lawsuits that these Democratic states have been filed on the administration's other efforts as well. So this is certainly going to be a case to watch.
All right, thanks for the update, Zach Schonfeld. The latest from ICE. U.S. immigration detention facilities are already at capacity with more than 47,000 detainees currently being held. Now, privately run immigration detention centers are reopening in Texas. NewsNation's border correspondent Allie Bradley joins us with the latest.
Yeah, Drew, so with these facilities maxed out for ICE detentions, the question then becomes, why close these processing facilities across the southern border? Why not repurpose them This one behind me, Firefly and Eagle Pass, it's quite literally being dismantled as we speak here. But high-level sources within CBP say they're actually going to keep a few of these centers open in strategic areas in order to help with all arrests and deportation, including ICE interior arrests. So what we heard is an official with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement said on a call that ICE was expanding its capacity with support from the U.S. Defense Department, U.S. Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons. Now, ICE is calling on Congress to provide more money for housing, as it's currently housing more than 6,000 more detainees than it's funded to, as is Border Czar Tom Homan. Here's what he said earlier this month.
All I know, we need the money to continue doing what we're doing. We need money for more beds. We need money for more flights. We need money to keep concentrating on worse and worse. ICE is already in the hole. And we need Congress to step up and give us the funding we need so President Trump will keep his promise to the American people.
This as they're reopening a facility in Dilley, Texas in roughly 2 months. That one has been closed for about a year, while a facility in Karnes, Texas that regularly houses single adult men is transitioning to detain family units, according to sources. Now, we heard from Governor Greg Abbott's office, who says the governor has been in regular conversations with the Trump administration about available land and facilities for use. They said, quote, under the Texas Constitution, any effort to lease or donate Texas land to the federal government must be conducted through the governor's office, and these conversations remain ongoing. Texas Land Commissioner Don Buckingham is in lockstep with the governor and says they're offering up whatever land the Trump administration needs for these efforts. Now, when it comes to who is being housed in these maxed out facilities, remember, the border czar himself said anybody who crosses the southern border illegally is considered a criminal. So that's who they have in these facilities. It could be just about anybody. We know they were going after the worst of the worst, but they have apprehended other individuals as well. So the issue is they have to detain them, and then they do go through a process, Drew. They're not just picking them up and then putting them on a plane and dropping them out of the plane with a parachute. They have to actually detain them, get cooperation with the country, get information verified, and all those things. So there is a process here, and that is why they are housing them. Now, with these facilities, it's important to note, like this one in Eagle Pass, a lot of people that cross the border, we're only seeing about 244 on average this month coming across the border, being apprehended by Border Patrol. They're not staying in these communities down here at the border. They go to the interior. So these ICE arrests are mostly happening in the interior. They'd have to bring them back down here. They'd have to transport them. That would cost money and things like that. So they're utilizing more interior facilities, including local sheriff's departments like the one in Laramie County in Wyoming. Drew?
NewsNation's Allie Bradley. Thank you. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.